Trustee Burrell is absent. Trustee Gala.
Here.
Trustee Meadow.
Here.
Trustee Rule is absent. Trustee Samari is absent. Trustee Suplet
Here.
and President Zager.
Here. Okay, go right. What did you?
Please allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice.
Okay, thank you all. Any public comments? Let's see, we keep moving on. All right, we've got a lot going on here tonight, gang, so. Get straight to it. Item 1, a review of the annual financial reports.
Okay, I would invite Martha Trotter to join us at the table. If you'd like to come over here, and so we'll talk through the draft of the audit for the year ending December 31st, 2022.
Thank you. Good evening. I am Martha Trotter. I'm the partner on the library's audit engagement, and I will be presenting to you today what we have issued so far is a preliminary draft of the annual financial report, as well as the board communication, which we are expecting to finalize next month. So I'll be reviewing the preliminary draft. Just to note, although this is a preliminary draft, it has been through our quality control process and through our review process. We don't anticipate anything changing in terms of the balances that are presented here today. The only changes we're anticipating are the incorporation of the management discussion and analysis, which was a separate document provided to you for review for tonight's meeting. And then, of course, the dating of the report, which will be completed once we have all the file documentation in place and the management representation letter returned. So in terms of the balances that are presented here today, you can assume that those will be issued in the final report as well. We're not anticipating any changes to those. So first, I'll review the annual financial report draft for you. Just to want to focus on a few key items that you can find in the annual financial report. Beginning on pages 1 and through page 3 is where you'll find the independent auditor's report. And based on our procedures performed in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards, we are expecting to issue a clean, unmodified opinion on the library's financial statements. And that is the highest level of opinion that can be issued, or the highest level of assurance that we can provide. So that is based on our auditing standards. We were required to perform certain levels of testing on the balances that are presented for you today. And based on that, we're able to expect that we can provide that highest level of assurance. In the basic financial statements, following the independent auditor's report is where that management discussion and analysis will be inserted once in the final report that's issued. That management discussion and analysis, if you're able to review the draft that was provided to you, that is a really good piece of information to read as you're reading the audited financial statements. It's prepared by management of the library, and it provides a little bit more context to the balances that are included in the basic financial statements themselves, and provides a little bit of additional analysis beyond just the numbers, as well as some comparative information and changes as compared to prior year, as well as the reasons behind those changes. So if you see fluctuations as compared to prior year, that MD&A section does provide some good context to what led to those changes, and gives you some comparative data that is not included in the financial statements themselves. So that is a great section to read the draft MD&A, and then once we have issued the final reports, that will be incorporated into the report itself. Beginning on page 4 and on page 5 is where you'll find the library's the first portion of the basic financial statements. Page 4 is the statement of net position, and page 5 is the statement of activities, or the income statement of the library. These two statements are presented on a full accrual basis of accounting. So what it summarizes the library's information for all its funds. Is presented in one column, the governmental activities in total. And it includes the long-term assets and liabilities of the library, which are not something that you're typically used to seeing on a month-to-month basis. The long-term assets such as in the library's case this year, it's a portion of the net pension asset for IMRF. The capital assets net of accumulated depreciation balances, so those are long-term assets that are not incorporated at the fund level financial statements. And long-term items such as the deferred outflows and inflows related to the net pension asset and long-term debt of the library, such as compensated absences or the OPEB liability of the library. So those are incorporated into these long-term balances.
I just want to make sure I'm on the right track here, because I thought you said a statement, this is picky,
Mhm.
statement of deposition was on page 4, but I'm seeing that on page 3. So am I looking at the right report?
It is, so page 4 is the statement of net position. I believe you're looking at MD&A page 3.
Oh, I didn't go past the MD&A. I do that every year.
The MD&A does.
You'll get another
summarize-
chance next year.
So the MD&A does summarize a lot of that information and does present that comparative statement of net position from current year and last year. The statement of net position itself and the basic financial statements is page number 4. So we try to isolate that MD&A from the
Yes.
regular financial statements with that MD&A pagination there. Just to highlight a few items on the statement of net position. You may note that the net investment in capital assets balance of the library's net position is $9,176,619. That is the portion of the library's net position that's tied up or associated with its capital assets, net of any associated debt. So that's your net investment in capital assets or your net capital assets balance. And then the remaining net position is unrestricted. That's a balance of 13.8 million. So that is the library's net position available for operations. The net position of the library increased 2.3 million over 2021's net position balance. That you can find on page 5, the statement of activities, which is the income statement presentation of the library. That's where you'll find the expenses as compared to the library's operating revenues and general revenues. So the library's net position improved over the prior year by 2.3 million. Following the statement of net position and statement of activities, beginning on page 6 is where you'll find the governmental funds financial statements. The major funds, the library's 2 funds that are reported are the general fund and the capital projects fund. So both of the library's funds are considered to be major, and an opinion is issued independently on each of those funds. There are no other funds reported as major, as each of the library's funds is considered major. You'll find on page 6, the balance sheet, the unassigned fund balance of the general fund of $11,054,259. That is roughly 78% of the library's 2022 expenditures of the general fund. So the library's unassigned fund balance covered over 78% of the library's fiscal year expenditures. Additionally, the other portions of the general fund balance, the prepaid items is considered non-spendable as it's related to items that have been prepaid for. And the assigned portion is assigned for subsequent year's budget. That's the portion of fund balance that's associated with the projected budget deficit for FY23. So the portion of the general fund's fund balance, which will cover the projected deficit. The capital projects fund had an ending fund balance of 3.4 million. And on page 8 of the financial statements is where you'll find the statement of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balances for these 2 funds. This is where you'll see that the increase in the general fund's fund balance was 1.3 million, and the capital projects fund balance decreased 931,000 over the prior year, and that was mostly associated with the capital outlay that was expended in FY 22 in the capital projects fund. Just to highlight, the way that these two statements are presented is on a modified accrual basis of accounting, so those long-term assets and liabilities that are incorporated on the statement of net position and statement of activities are not included here. These two statements are more in line with what you're used to seeing on a monthly basis, just those short-term assets and liabilities, your receivables, your liabilities that are expected to be paid within a year are what is incorporated in the presentation. The footnotes of the financial statements can be found on pages 10 through 26. There were no GASB pronouncements that were implemented for the library in 2022, so the footnotes, the disclosures included in the footnotes didn't change from prior year. I'm not going to go into detail on the footnotes, but we'll just note that here in the footnotes is where you can find some detailed information on the library's significant accounting policies, the library's capital asset activity for the year, the debt activity for the year, and detailed information on the library's IMRF and other post-employment benefit plan. A lot of that information can be found in the footnotes that supplement the financial statements. And then beginning on page 27 of the annual financial report through page 31 is a section called the required supplementary information. So this information is required to be presented in the financial statements. It includes the general fund's budget versus actual information, and also includes information on the library's OPEB plan and the library's IMRF plan. In the general fund budget versus actual, you can find that the library's budgeted original and final budgeted amounts for the general fund, as well as the actual. So if you're looking for a comparison of how the fund performed in comparison to what was budgeted, you can find that information there. The revenue is slightly below the, sorry. Revenue slightly over the final budgeted amounts, as well as expenditures slightly below the final budgeted amounts for the fiscal year. Other information included in the financial statements following the required supplementary information begin on page 32 and end on page 33. So the last two pages of the report. There are bit more detailed schedule of expenditures for the budget versus actual presentation for the general fund, as well as the capital projects funds budget versus actual presentation. So that general fund schedule provides more information, a little bit more breakdown on the expenditures as compared to budget, and the capital projects fund is the total budget versus actual schedule for that fund. And I can address any questions related to the annual financial report before I move on to the other document that you have.
What's the other document that we have?
The other document that I will be presenting is the board communication.
Just a couple questions regarding the adjustments to the journal entries that are found on page 5, 6, and 7.
Mhm.
Just working from page 5, if you could explain to us what the adjustment was for prepaid expense inventory prepaid of 269,000.
Sure. So AJE 1 on page 5 to adjust AP and prepaids. This is mostly related due to the library system transition. So the library is in the process of implementing a new ERP system for financial reporting. And there was adjustment made to ensure that balance is carried over properly from the old system to the new system. That adjustment needed to be cleared out when we received the unadjusted trial balances to net those balances for more accurate presentation in the financial statements. But that adjustment was made strictly as part of the transition from one ERP system to the next.
Okay, thank you. And the real estate taxes?
Sure, the real estate taxes, as you may know, the county issued its tax bills pretty late, and as a result, the amount of collections within 60 days of the fiscal year end, which are subject to accrual, were much more significant than in prior years. And because of that, the additional amounts that were collected related to the 2021 levy year, which is funding the 2022 fiscal year, were accrued back to the 2022 fiscal year as a receivable. And that's in order to reduce the fluctuation or variation from year to year, as those receivables within 60 days are subject to accrual and are related to the funding of the 2022 fiscal year.
Is that AJEO3 as well?
The AJEO3 is related, but not necessarily the same. That is the deferred revenue present, that's correction to the deferred revenue presentation. So the 2022 levy is a receivable that is offset by a deferred, because that will be funding the 2023 fiscal year. So your receivable is offset by a related deferred revenue. So that was a correction to the deferred presentation to show it net of the loss.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Everything, John?
Yep.
Okay. The other communication?
Okay, so the auditor's communication to the board is a document that includes a few pieces of required information. Our auditing standards require us to communicate certain items to those charged with management or to the board. What makes up this report, the first page 1 is just a memo to kind of summarize what is included, what is incorporated in this board communication packet. Page 2 is where you'll find the first piece of information that is required communication to the board. A few items to highlight in the letter that begins on page 2. You'll find on page 3, there's a few highlighted paragraphs or bolded paragraphs. We like to communicate whether there are any difficulties that are encountered during the audit process. And as we have disclosed here, there were no difficulties encountered during the audit process. The library's finance team provided us with all the information that was needed to conduct the audit. We do ask for quite a bit of information as part of the audit. That's just the nature of an audit. We look at a lot of documents, we ask a lot of questions. So it's inherently just a burden in addition to the day-to-day running of day-to-day operations. And we are always appreciative when staff are able to assist us with those questions, knowing that they have other responsibilities beyond just the audit. So we note here that there were no difficulties throughout the audit process. The paragraph on corrected and uncorrected misstatements, that is to direct you to the AJUs that we just went over, as well as a schedule that's also included in this report, the past adjustment schedule. So the AJEs of those that were disclosed, just AJE 1 is considered to be material to the financial statements as a whole. And that was the correction of that prepaid and accrual balance. The other adjustments that were proposed were not considered material, but were still with discussion with the libraries. Staff were determined to be appropriate to be made and were incorporated in the balances presented. The past adjustments is a separate schedule. Those are items that are overall considered not material in nature. And however, we do want to just let the board know that those were not incorporated into the balances presented. So those are considered past adjustments. So adjustments that were small enough that we could pass on them, but still wanted to be acknowledged that those would have been posted to the balances. And then also here we have a paragraph stating that there were no disagreements with management throughout the course of the audit.
Good.
Boring.
Pretty clean. So the AGs on page 5, we went over those. The past adjustments that I referred to, that can be found on page 6 and 7. And in both cases, the past adjustments are the current effect of prior past adjustments, so this is kind of the items that were passed on last year and how they would be impacting the net position and change in that position of the library had they been implemented last year. So they're rolling off of the impact is rolling off this year. And then finally, beginning on page 9 is where you'll find the management letter. This is where we would communicate any material weaknesses or significant deficiencies to the board if there were any, based on the procedures, the audit procedures that we completed, the testing that was done. Nothing came to our attention that rose to the level of a material weakness or significant deficiency. So there's nothing that we have that nature based on the items that we reviewed and tested, which rose to that level. So there's nothing to communicate from that aspect here. There are also no other deficiencies that we noted from our testing. So the only information really included in the management letter here are other comments, which relate specifically to upcoming GASB pronouncements that may impact the library's financial statements in future years. And there are items that we'll be addressing with the library's finance staff as they come due to be implemented to ensure that the financial statements present those items correctly in the future.
Very good. Any questions or comments?
Congratulations on a great audit. I mean, you can't do any better, so well done. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, this is one of the more important things that we have accomplished is this audit to make sure that we're doing things correctly. And I know it's a lot of work for you and, you know, the finance team overall. So yeah, thank you for doing such a good job on getting this all done. Okay, any more questions or anything? All right, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thanks, you too. Okay, let's move on to item 2, strategic plan.
All right, I would ask Sarah Keister to join us at the table to talk about changes to our strategic plan since our last meeting.
Hi, thanks for having me back. Everyone has the revised draft, yes?
Yes.
Okay. What I'd like to do is just go through what has changed since the last time you saw this, and then, again, happy to answer any questions. As you can see, there were no changes to the vision or mission statements. I want to skip values for now and come back to that. Under goal 1, the first bullet point, we just changed that wording a little bit so that we didn't say services over and over again. And that was the only change on that goal. The second goal, following the board discussion at the April meeting, we revised the outcomes slightly so that it reads more clearly, and then we refined that a bit at our planning committee meeting last week. And then goal 3 had the majority of our changes. If you remember, we had used the word reimagine in the goal. We had a lengthy discussion about that at our committee meeting last week and landed on enhance. So enhance the library's role in the everyday lives of Arlington Heights residents. Then in the first bullet point under there, it used to say position the library to comprehensively respond to social and economic community need. And we replaced the word comprehensively with responsibly and thoughtfully. The next change, the bullet point right under there where we talk about emerging adults. This was also a lengthy conversation. And what we finally landed on was really just offering an asterisk with the actual definition of this term. As many of the members of the planning committee pointed out, it's a defined term in literature and felt it was an opportunity to educate the public about what we're talking about here. And then the last thing under goal 3, just a small edit to the outcome. And again, that was a change that came out of the board meeting in April. If we want to jump back to the values section, the only change here was actually adding a value. So the very last one for our commitment to staff. We've been talking a bit about what, where do staff fall in this? Do we need to have a standalone goal for staff? and had talked at the last board meeting about ultimately adding a value to make sure that this was an enduring part of the library's planning processes, including this plan and then plans to follow. The value that we landed on here came out of the committee meeting last week. So I'd like to start our conversation here, kind of for you to reflect on this, if this fits what you feel is appropriate as a board. But also to make sure that we are providing an appropriate level of specificity regarding staff in this plan. The committee, again, has given a lot of thoughtful feedback, and there are some on the committee who feel that there's opportunity to be more actionable related to staff, and others who feel that this value, stands above the goals and strategies, and is appropriate here. So I'd like to throw that out for the board. Kind of what do you feel about this value, and what are your thoughts on including other staff-related items in this plan?
I love the value. I think you did a great job with that, and I like where it's been placed. If we were going to get to any more specificity, I think it would be under a goal in the form of a bullet, probably be related to our survey, implementing our survey, our employee survey. And if someone sees an appropriate place where that bullet might land, I would support that, but I think you've done an incredible job with the values.
I'll just echo that. I personally don't know that it needs to be anywhere else, but just the value itself kind of checks all the boxes that I wanted it to. So, great job.
Now, when we do the action plans, we are going to take into account all of these values, correct? And have them as a place, because the reason being, when we talk ad nauseam, we had it in the last time because it was a different time period. We were going through some changes here and everything, so we made sure that we made that a big focus for that time, and we didn't want to lose any focus though. So the idea behind this was to make sure that we have it as a permanent part of the document. It's there, it's not going anywhere by the whims of whatever board, it is there, what they want to have those goals at that particular time. And I didn't mean that negatively, like there's going to be a board that's going to do something negative. I didn't mean to say it that way, but just the word that came out. But that's why I asked the question. I just want to make sure that as we're doing this, we're going to be, when we're making the action plan, that is going to be one of the focuses that's going to be there. How we do the service outside the walls, how we grow our services and resources, and how we enhance our library's role. We're taking that back and we're saying, okay, how is this affecting the staff? How is this growing the staff? How is this improving the staff, their life?
Yeah, as we're planning toward the goals, and we take into account all of those values. So what is our fiscal responsibility? How do we include diversity, equity, and inclusion? How do we provide free and equitable access? All of those things are considered as how we do business on a regular basis. And the staff environment is, of course, one of those things. Keep in mind, we also do have the employee engagement survey that we have action plans on that is actually, feedback regarding the environment and the culture from the staff that is separate from our strategic plan.
But that falls into the values part of it though, because there's a value that we have in the staff that we're doing presenting that type of item.
Yeah.
Okay. Questions, comments? Yeah.
Couple other observations. So in this text, you refer to community and community residents except in two places. One of the value under connection, where you specifically identify Arlington Heights residents. And then on the outcome of goal 3, resources to Arlington Heights. Is there a reason that you changed from community residents Arlington Heights in specific.
No, I'm just getting used to customers, if I'm honest. If I can comment on the phrase Arlington Heights residents under connection, that value used to be called, I think, a focus on Arlington Heights,
Mhm.
where the intent of it was not explicit, but that we serve our residents first, essentially. So I think that was just a residual from that former value, but no, there was no tactic behind how we were referring to this group.
Okey-doke.
Just kind of following up on that. So the business community in Arlington Heights is somebody that we serve also. Could it say connecting something of the fact of connecting the Arlington Heights community or something that effect? That would, so we're not forgetting that part of it.
I like that.
I like that. Instead of residents, you're saying?
Yes.
I agree.
Do we want to change that in all spots that we residents or transfer?
Well, I don't know that it's probably used elsewhere. You say Arlington Heights community under goal 1.
And 3. Yeah, I suppose that's.
But the community values and go to.
Oh, the goal 3 is Arlington Heights residents. Everyday lives of Arlington Heights residents.
Arlington Heights community. Sarah, you look like you got it.
No, I'm just, that's not, just thinking that, yeah, I get it, yeah.
It's like everyday life, everyday life of Arlington, of the Arlington Heights community. Yeah.
I think community makes it. You know, when I think about. Like our school systems where they're technically in. You know, Mount Prospect, or they're like just over that border, but they still are. Because of the school that they're at there, you know, Arlington Heights card holders, you know, I think that makes it more inclusive to those. Outliers that are still part of our community, so I think that's a good choice. I have one other sort of question, and I'm not trying to open a bag of worms, but under the, under our values, I'm noticing that, you know, oh, like under diversity and inclusion, it comes off with a very like, we cultivate, under fiscal responsibility, we take responsibility. These are very actionable sort of things. Under the staffing, it's we value. And value is kind of an ambiguous word to me a little bit. And like, I wonder if that should have a more active verbiage there. I'm not sure what that would be, but just that we cultivate or we strive to encourage, emote. It's just, you know, again, not trying to open a can of words, but seeing that we value it, it's like, okay, great. Well, what does that mean? What are you doing to help make that happen? How do you show that value? And I guess that's where I'm just questioning, like, can we somehow put how we're showing that we value that?
I mean, if we just change the word from value to cultivate, just go with the same thing up there, you know, we cultivate a supportive, empowering, and cohesive staff culture that fosters, I mean, it sounds like it would fit in there, and sure, it means that we're actually going to be taking some type of action other than just saying, oh, isn't the staff nice, you know, we value that
Yes.
type of thing. I think that's what you're trying to get. what you're trying
Yes,
to get
yes,
to.
and I mean, I understand this is all under values, like I realize the irony of that, but you know, yeah, that we're making actionable steps towards showing that we,
Nurture.
yeah, well, nurture is a good word.
What the rest of the board, are you? good with
I
that?
like cultivate,
Cultivate is a stronger
I
term.
think it's,
It kind of matches the rest of the.
mhm, we use that one already.
Yeah,
I mean, it's
All
a
right.
unique word, so it's, you know,
fair. Okay,
I'm fine with it.
good. Very good. Anything else?
Like I said, it takes me a minute, so back to the initial just on where staff fits, so just to, kind of just understand correctly that, the board, we're saying that the commitment to staff is gonna remain in the values, if that's a solid enough, statement. And I guess my question to Sarah would be that, our goals ever, like, have you seen plans where you put it, so strengthen the library service outside its walls, and a bullet point there, somehow make a reference to, it's a strengthen customer opportunity, so to put that into staff, cultivate, but, staff necessary to be able to, what is it? I'm trying to think, I'm very lost for words this evening, but, somehow put that in there to be able to leave room for whatever it takes to acknowledge staff would have to do that.
I have when it's been a specific position that's being created or specific professional development that is needed. So when you're viewing a strategic plan, it's generally different than the everyday things we're doing. I know a couple people felt strongly about including that, so I'm fine doing that. It would just, I think if we're not specific about what that looks like, then it loses meaning.
Okay.
Here.
That's right. I was just, because there were people in the community that mentioned that, I just want to make sure we're just understanding that that's like how that would look, and not to go back, backwards, but just that if, again, and I really appreciate that wording and how we got that, you kind of help with that, the value statement there. So it's very comprehensive, to put that in there. So just that is going to be, that's what we're all saying, right? That goal is going to reflect the staff. Right? Because I didn't say anything originally because I was part of the committee, so I was kind of curious to make sure that everyone, or they just don't, okay, if you don't have an opinion, or you're good with it.
So yeah, I guess if I were to like draw this out visually, the way I see it is the values are sort of like the foundation. And then, the goals are like, I guess, like the walls, and then, like kind of the bullet points are like the purposes, I guess. So it's like, yeah, to me, it's like, okay, yeah, each goal is sort of built with the values in mind. So that's kind of where I'm coming from.
I don't want to be dismissive either. The points that were made, the folks who did want, it's specifically called out in here. I think, as a committee, we've talked about this, there's definitely opportunity to include that in action steps, but also the last piece of this will be figuring out how you're going to evaluate it, and we can incorporate that into, what it looks like to regularly report to the board on progress here. What are you doing to show your commitment to staff? So I don't want, just because it's only a value that the meaning of that would get lost either. We can still incorporate that into other pieces.
That's good.
Such an interesting thing to the board consider going forward is we've never really done a status report. On the strategy and strategic plan, so maybe something for us to kind of consider as we go forward. Not
Well, I would,
month, but maybe yearly.
his performance is
Yeah,
based upon the
incorporates that,
strategic plan. It's the foundation of that is the strategic plan.
So it's in everyone's interest.
I would probably say yes and no, because we do. He is reviewed obviously on certain goals and certain things, but I don't think we ever really just focused and said, hey, how are you doing compared to these three goals?
I would say yes and yes. And if you look at the actual matrix on the left-hand side, those are the goals from the strategic plan.
Yes, I don't really yes, no, again.
But we can do periodic updates on this and kind of show you where we're at with it. I think that makes sense, maybe as part of the director's report or something. Can I go back to the values one more time? The term cultivate, using it in two of the values, does that seem like too much? I'm not saying we shouldn't use it for the staff one, but maybe change it for the other one.
It does.
Sounds like yes.
Sarah already
That's
said it.
what-
Sarah's like, "It's still bugging me."
Yeah, if you wanna get,
Yeah.
if you really wanna spend another few minutes on it, we could come, but nobody liked nurture, just saying.
It's like nurture, but it's a little,
Well, then maybe you can, and I would agree. And you don't wanna nurture an inclusive atmosphere. You wanna cultivate it, so let's just go with it twice.
The word provide. And see if that
Provide,
works.
promote.
Not, for one of them.
Okay.
We provide an inclusive atmosphere or
Provide a supportive.
provide a supportive, empowering, maybe you could use provide in one of those.
We'll take it back to the.
Thank you, Carol.
email.
well, okay, so one above it, it says, we are committed to our role connecting. So, but then below it's our commitment, which is, so maybe we could play with that, but,
Let's,
That's always.
I'm gonna
So,
let.
we're gonna be wordsmithing this, yeah, so to death at a certain degree, at certain points.
Show it to five people.
I know she loves our help.
Yes, we last committee
Yes.
email.
Go through the source and put everything. in there, that's good, cultivate.
I like provide.
Everyone can-
Yeah.
Everyone votes on one. But the ultimate thing is, yes, we have to have some, it would be nice to have a word in there that shows that we're actually going to be taking action, that's thinking about it.
We could value and provide a supportive, empowering, but you go way out there in the
They're
limb.
valid.
Should you get-
Yeah, you're right. There.
Okay. Okay. You good?
Good, yes, very nice.
And thank you for all your help and all your work.
So after we have kind of the wordsmithing done, our communications and marketing team will go over it one more time for style and then reformat to kind of like our current one, just in way. So we'll bring that back then to the board meeting in May.
Yes, it's meeting one.
Meeting one
in May.
Yes.
Right. Okay. All right, let's move on to item 3, revisions to policy 3.001, materials selection.
Okay, so I brought this one back to committee of the whole because I felt that there was a little bit more in-depth conversation to be had on this policy before bringing it to the board for approval or consideration. So I would ask Lisa Babas to join us at the table. She is our collection services manager and so she has the opportunity to weigh in as well. So coming out of the last meeting, we had a number of changes and suggestions that the board wanted to see in this policy, which we did include here. We also did add a couple other things in here that are outlined in the memo that staff requested that we put in there. Some of them come from ALA's recommendation. Other ones help with the conversations that they have with customers on the phone. And then I think that's. Oh, and then I did remove an item that has previously been formally reviewed for reconsideration. Removal of an item was denied, was not eligible for reconsideration for 1 year. After the conversation at the committee of the whole, felt that that one, I don't know, that felt really great to leave in there. So pull that one out, but if the board felt that that should go back in there, we can put it back in there. So Lisa, do you want to maybe talk through some of the changes that are included in there?
Yes, the notes that I have, and I'm not sure if anybody has questions about any of these, but the second paragraph where upholding library bill of rights, the freedom of reach statement, obviously that's recommended language by the ALA and the Office of Intellectual Freedom, the OIF, so we wanted to include that in there. And then the next section that I know there was conversation at the last COW was the fourth paragraph, by representing multiple points of view within the collection, that section. I know there was some conversation about including the word offensive in this, but we felt strongly that that should be in there because frequently it's not just a differing point of view. It's when I say I don't want that thing, of course, I mean, we can have different point of view, but not this. And it really is, they would say it's offensive, and that's really why we want to include that in there. And then the second sentence about you can choose for yourself And you can reject for yourself, but you can't make those decisions for other customers. So we really wanted to include that in there. That helps us in our conversation when we're talking to customers.
I love the second sentence in that paragraph, the choice of library resources by a customer is an individual matter. And I don't know that one needs to say more than that. I think it's that first sentence by representing is self-incriminating and going to actually provoke argument. And the reason being is libraries will inevitably contain. Well, no, they won't. If you would agree with me, Lisa. Libraries wouldn't inevitably contain that. They would have the things that are right. You get my point? That's where I see that path going. If you have this conversation, you're really bringing the person into a debate, which is not what you want to have. You don't want to have a debate here. The choice of library resources is an individual matter. You make yours, I make mine. Our job is, and then you won't go on to explain that. So the point I'm making is, I love the second sentence. I still think the first sentence is going to put you in an uncomfortable position, not help but hurt.
Can you point that? I'm lost. Where are you?
This is the 1, 2,
Right here. Oh, here we go. Okay.
yeah, by representing multiple points of view, it will inevitably contain materials that are
Yeah,
offensive.
is it part of
No, it won't. It may contain materials that are differences.
Just take out inevitably. Libraries will contain materials that are offensive to some members of the community.
Why would you incriminate yourself? That's, I mean, why would I say, I'm gonna offend you, Mike? And I'm gonna go out and buy books that do that.
What if it was libraries may contain materials that people might have?
You know, have you ever been in front of a judge? Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think that, to that point, though, I think it acknowledges the other person might be offended. Like, I think it brings in, like, it's not just that we're holding, we hold, we just keep everything. It's like, no, we recognize this might offend you. It's kind of, I feel like it's a collaborative approach. So I see what you're saying. I definitely see, because it's like saying, you know, that you're opening this door for a conversation, but I think that's the point, is that it is to be a conversation, and the goal is, what I'm hearing is that the goal isn't to have someone stomp off and be mad, it's to hopefully at least have a little bit of a, yeah, that really stinks, they didn't, I get what, you know, or even just like, well, at least they heard me, but I mean, I see your point, I
Well,
understand why.
saying it's one thing, putting it in writing is another.
Yeah.
Well, it backs up the policy, I mean, that's what the whole point is, they can point
Well,
to the policy.
it doesn't back, see, and I said it doesn't back up the policy. I think it opens the window to a debate that isn't necessary for a material selection policy.
Yeah, I'm. Sorry, Carol,
I'm just gonna say, I mean, without getting too deep, you know, dig yourself in, you know, what if it was something like the library's collection represents multiple points of view.
Yeah.
The choice of library resources by customers an individual matter. A person may reject resources, etc.
Yep.
So I think that says it without, yeah,
Without telling people how they should feel.
yeah, exactly. So you might want to consider that.
My point of view of this is. I love the concept that's in that whole paragraph, but I'm with John. I think it's kind of leading an emotional charge more than a practical. This is supposed to be about how the library goes about business of choosing materials, not necessarily how we make value decisions. On different, it's supposed to be, this is the process, this is who selects it, this is the way that we go about doing that. Now, if we wanted to go back and think about, we should call Sarah back in here, think about the values, you know, that we have and what's important to us, you know, and putting something potentially like that, maybe worse than a little bit down from there, sure, but that whole paragraph, when I read this, just made me uncomfortable, because I felt like we were getting away from what the actual, just the process was, to tell everybody, hey,
Right.
we've got a process, this is how we decide on it.
And I hear what you're saying, and I think, you know, in reading something, I guess I do think that
you know, Lisa, you get, your team faces this. So, I mean, I would just ask, you know, for some consideration, I think when we're coming to look at this is like, this is a team that deals with this and this is how they're coming together to say, I think this would be our best way to work with the customers that we're dealing with. So, I mean, with all due respect, and maybe each of us have in our own way dealt with the similar situation, but I feel like there has to be some deference to what, or deference, sorry, to what you're experiencing. And because you came in and you said that I recognize offensive is in there. And my team, we feel strongly about that. So I hear what you're saying. And so that plays a significant weight when I'm looking at this. And even though I might say, oh, I don't know, yet you're telling the board that I do this and, you know, we feel this is really imperative. So I just asked for that consideration.
And yeah, Lisa, if I may, it feels to me like you're saying like, it's almost like a funnel where, you know, maybe you catch, you know, if this language or language like this is in here, that's a way to kind of like filter out some of the issues where you can tell people like, yeah, we know that this is not going to be for everyone. And then if they keep going and want to take it a step further, they can, but this is just a way to kind of like assuage people, I guess.
All of which is true, but it's not a policy, it's a manager's prerogative. What she chooses to do with her staff in terms of coaching them and working them through, you know, customer management, this would certainly be appropriate for that. But it's not a strategic discussion, and it doesn't really therefore belong in a policy based upon that describes, as Greg has said, the process of material selection. It's taking it another step beyond the policy, which you have a prerogative to do as the manager. But I, again, think you're opening yourselves up to more problems by having it in writing as a policy than by taking it out.
In a way, it's very helpful to have it in the policy because then we can say, our policy says this. So we have that to rely on instead of them thinking it's just me saying this. Sometimes people, when they say, oh, you have differing viewpoints, that means very different things to different people. And it could be, well, of course you would have this, but why on earth would you have this? And it's like, I may not think we should have cookbooks on this particular country because it's a small country and they can find it online. That's a different viewpoint. And that's not what we're talking about here. This is someone who may say, we don't think you should have this particular topic. And there's plenty in the news we could refer to because that's offensive to me. And having it stated in the policy is very helpful to us. If I can just, Cindy Hammond is my collection supervisor, and she handles a lot of these. They go to her first, and then they come to me if they escalate. And I don't know if you have anything else you want to add to this about how useful it is.
And that's one of the things, like, I totally understand and like where you all are coming from. And I really appreciate that from a staff standpoint. From my personal experience dealing with this somewhat regularly, we actually have the opposite effect of having the word, like, the word actually offensive in a policy, is because we'll go back to customers and they'll say, I can't believe you have this book on campuses. I don't know why you would ever have a book on this particular topic. And if you go through, like, oh, we have a lot of different viewpoints. A lot of the initial reaction is, yeah, I get that. I want you to have everything but this. And by us being able to say, you know, I understand this wasn't for you, come back with kindness and empathy, but our policy literally says and would, then we'll, like, you know, copy and paste it and put it in, that we do have offensive materials. Some of that are going to be for you, but some of it is important to other people in our community, and it's important for us to be able to do all of it. We found it incredibly helpful to have it. I know it goes a little bit far, and I understand where you're coming from, but having that black and white actually tends to de-escalate situations, because it's that black and white. Oh yeah, there is something offensive here.
Why would you curate offensive materials?
Because some people may find books about the Cubs instead of the White Sox offensive.
But why would you intentionally go out and curate offensive materials?
Because what?
You don't.
Well,
You curate materials that I find offensive. But what this says is that you curate offensive material.
That are offensive to them.
It's offensive to one.
Okay, let's take a step back here for a second.
Mhm.
There's two lines of thought going on here, in my view, and they're both right. It is enough just as a manager to decide you need to have the support of management and the staff, or excuse me, and the board into what it is. That's going to make your job easier, okay? 100%. But on the other end, there is the reality of the situation that we may be in, or the climate that could be out there, where there will be people that will pick up on that word, all right? That will do exactly what John is saying, and it will stir the pot a little bit. What this board has to make a decision on, or understand where we're going, is which of those do we want to do? Can we do both, and can we do both of them? You all know me, and my opinion on some of these things. I tend to go conservative on these type of things, where I don't want to put something in writing that's going to be sitting there forever for somebody to look at and find a word, just kind of fire on. But at the same time, we do need to have something in there to essentially give them cover. So they have some type of understanding. So in my opinion, we have to figure out a way to do both of them. If we don't have it in the policy, we should have it somewhere listed where it's board approved, that this is how we feel, that is how we feel. Sorry, you said, Sarah.
Well, I was just, you had just said something, that, I guess what I was thinking before maybe you said something, is that, it seems like that there's this tendency to go neutral, to use language that is so-called neutral, and not pick strong words that might evoke emotion. However, I would just put out there that, especially in the environment right now, that there really is no such thing as neutrality. Sometimes by not choosing a side, you're still choosing a side of the more comfortable, and therefore it does, by default, you're going with the status quo, like what has always works for the certain person making the decision. And so I think we're dealing in an environment that is very volatile. And so to use the word, saying that, even how you explained it, just that saying that, yeah, this might be offensive. And yes, I understand trustee Supplet's point that why would we curate offensive material? But, it's not, I think the whole point is it's just material that might be offensive. And so someone's going to find an argument point no matter what. And I think trying to tread the line of not trying to upset people is going that neutral route, which is kind of, again, falling into default of what has worked for certain people, but has not worked for clearly so many others.
Let me just shed a little bit of light here. Mike, you weren't able to come to that meeting at Barrington Library of the Directors. And we had a Zoom meeting with, I can't remember her name, but she was in Alexi Janulius's office, the Secretary of State, because we were asking about this bill that is now in the Senate and most likely is going to pass, and the governor will sign it at some point. And basically that whole bill, it really comes down, there's some, we get into the weeds of, well, what does this mean? And will people still be able to ask for reconsideration materials and the whole, because everybody, all of us sitting in that room, we all have processes for that. And basically what this gets down to is they want a law that one person in the community, which I guess has happened somewhere in this country, and say, I don't like that book, remove it, and it's removed. So what this law does is basically it hangs it on the librarians, not even the board, not the community, because the board is a community, that any decision is made with librarian input, and that is fine. So even if, I suppose librarians said, oh, we made a mistake with this book, this really shouldn't be here, I don't know who ordered this. Hey, if a librarian said it, you're not breaking the law, and you won't put your per capita tax in jeopardy. Because if you don't follow the law or adopt a policy or adopt the Library Bill of Rights, then you are not eligible for any state funding. So, you know, I think what John is saying, you know, what you run the risk of, it's twofold. It is engaging a little bit more of an argument, but the reality of it is people don't read the policy. They don't read it anyway, and you can show it to them, whatever. But if it helps the staff, you know, to have that strength of, well, this is our policy does state that we might have some things that you don't like, but that person is fine with, and, you know, but the conversation is very important in these situations, very important. And, so.
Yeah, I think I'll just add here, and we were just talking about the, you know, I know we haven't adopted it yet, but the new strategic plan. I think if one of those, you know, kind of pillars is valuing the staff, you know, we have 2 staff members here who are telling us this would help us, so. Just saying.
And you know, I was just thinking about that. We literally were just talking about our strategic plan, and one of them is diversity and inclusion, which I think speaks to the curation of the materials that we have, and that sometimes those can be triggering for people who maybe have different thoughts about whatever those materials might be. And then we have a commitment to staff. And so, you know, I think that in the same way that I'm not going to go into my mechanic and tell him how to do his job fixing my car, I want to be able to give him whatever information he needs about my car, but I want to be able to give them what they need. And when you are face to face with somebody, they're not reading the policy, but to be able to have it, and if they're telling us this is what's really going to be impactful, or be able to, you know, dissuade 90% of the situation, you're still going to get the one person, the 10 people, whatever, that are going to go off the deep end, regardless of if you know, God came down and issued a oath, they would still be upset about it. But if it's supporting them and still holds our values, I'm not saying that we just, you know, willy-nilly, but I think going back to how it's phrased, you know, and I do understand what Trustee Suplet's saying, and I do concur that, like, yeah, it is a little bit emotionally charged, and nowhere else do we really have that. But to speak to the culture that is happening right now in our country, I think it is something that, and maybe there's a different way to be able to support them, but I think we need to really think about how do we do that? How do we go about making sure that they have the support that they need to say, hey, this is why we do what we do, and this is how we do it.
This sentence here isn't quite correct. By representing multiple points of view within the collection, libraries will inevitably contain materials that are offensive to some members of the community. It should be of their community, or maybe just strike members of the community and say to some people. You know, because right now you're talking generally, you're not talking about Arlington Heights Library will contain offensive materials to our community. But to say some members of which community? Because you're talking about libraries. So maybe just saying libraries will contain materials that are offensive to some people, period.
May contain.
May contain, yes. Libraries will inevitably contain materials that may be offensive, yes, that may be offensive to some people. Otherwise, I think you have to put in the word to some members of their communities maybe, because libraries is, you're using it in a general way there.
Hello, by representing multiple points of view within the collection, libraries may contain materials, or library contain materials that some may find offensive. Is that
Yeah,
okay?
and that's good. Take that inevitably too, because that's.
Yeah. That may.
As try as hard as we might, we're still gonna have these kinds, you know, take out inevitably, that's good, yeah.
So we're changing inevitably
that
to
feel?
may.
Where you said it, good.
Libraries may contain materials that are offensive to some individuals, so we would have.
Well, no, what
Whatever.
you said was good.
I said by representing multiple points of view within the collection, libraries contain materials that some may find offensive.
Yes,
Okay, may.
Yeah.
So it's may contain materials that some may find offensive.
it states it,
Takes
but
it
it's
off.
not like, yeah.
Mhm.
One other thing I would add on this page, do you want to add, Library Bill of Rights, freedom to read, how about freedom to view? You wanna, I don't know if you wanna add that or not, but. ALA has a freedom to view statement, you might take a look at that.
We'll take a look
Is
at
that specific to like online?
But no, I think it's probably audio visual type
Oh,
stuff,
okay.
yeah, something. Although streaming or, cause the DVDs are disappearing, but.
So let me just throw something in there.
We'll look at it, yeah.
You know, going down this path, it's fine if that's what the board's will is. Now, I will say one thing. You know, yes, I recognize this is the staff asking you for this. And I was the one who just fought to get that thrown into the values, get that thrown into the strategic plan. So, you know, I am not forgetting that. What I am trying to do is I want to make sure that we keep this, we're setting a precedent right now. And just realize that, as Andy rightly said, we haven't done this before. We haven't said this type, every other policy that we have has our directions on how we're performing this on a day-to-day basis. And the cover, the protection, whatever we give to everybody else is done on a daily basis here, or I should say a monthly basis on what we do and how we perform, right? A daily basis actually with the management team here. We have to realize that going ahead and doing this is going to change. And are we going, and it is this board as we move forward, is this the type of steps that we want to take when we're reviewing policies? We're reviewing a whole bunch of, especially HR policies right now. What is it, 25 different policies?
Something like that, yeah.
Something like that. We're gonna be reviewing over the next couple of months or so. How do we want to approach those when different things come up? So just kind of keep that in mind, please. And just one last.
I was gonna ask Lisa how she felt about the change that we just were presenting.
I thought the change was what we're looking for. I think having that philosophy in there, I think that I'm very happy with that. And thank you for saying that.
I have some things on the second page. Move to one. I don't think I put in that second paragraph about labeling.
I'm sorry, where are we?
Second, that, oh,
Under Flex's maintenance.
clutch
Oh,
and
thank you.
maintenance,
Thank
yes, I'm sorry. I don't think I would say items are not labeled to show approval or disapproval. I would not put that in there.
Don't,
No, I would say to indicate age appropriateness. That's already been established with PG and G and all that on the D, but you know, I think, I don't know.
that was
just
the
bothers
objective
me.
of that point, though, to state that we are not rating materials,
Um,
that we only do that to indicate age appropriate. Or,
I don't know.
basically for
See,
location.
and that's,
Yeah.
say what you're doing, never say what you're not doing.
Okay.
No, I mean, that's a rule of thumb. Say what you're doing, but never say what you're not doing, because that just now opens it up to a debate.
Well, and could that even, I mean, what you just explained of what that means is that the AHML library is not labeling these items. So it just, you could put that,
Yeah.
like, does not, label, what am I trying to say? I'm not saying it well. You know, the PG
Do you
13,
put
that is
on
not something.
DVDs?
Was that
The
rating?
G, PG,
No, the motion picture assigns those, so it comes on the, we're not.
yeah, but
adding
you're
that.
talking about labeling here. Items are not labeled. So
By
even if
us.
it came from them,
They're not labeled by us.
right, but
Right, that's what I'm trying to
Yeah.
say, is that like, you know, items are indicated by the Motion Picture Society or whatever they're.
Well, then AHML does not label items to indicate age appropriateness.
Thank you, that's what I was trying to say.
So for background on this, this is something that ALA recommends, and they say, as the reason that labels are viewpoint neutral directional aids intended to facilitate access by making it easier for users to locate resources. So we want to avoid labels that are prejudicial or that may restrict access based on a value judgment in the content, language, or themes of a resource. So when we're saying that this is a J, we're not saying this is necessarily appropriate for your child who is in that age group. That's up for the parent to decide if it's age appropriate. We're saying it's J because that's where it is in the collection.
And I think we need to differentiate between labeling and classifying.
Okay,
That's a classification.
okay.
J is classifying.
And it might have been changed to labeling because classifying might be library lingo.
Oh, well, it is.
Label, so I'm open to that change.
Yeah. But, you know,
But that's
sometimes
fine.
that may come out in a conversation with a customer. No, I'm sorry, that's not labeling, that's a classification that gives the
Right.
location of where they are in our collection.
Well, go ahead. Sarah. So if, to the point, trustee Suplet has a point about, you know, keeping it, you know, positive, what are we doing? Would it be appropriate, to say something along the lines that, items are labeled, reason labeled to reflect what we are doing, or is it more helpful to, indicate what you, I mean, to have it as it is important to say that, hey, this isn't an approval or disapproval, like that needs to be in there too. Or does not reflect or something. I'm trying to think of, I was trying to flip it, you know,
Yeah.
they're not in there.
I might pull some of the words from ALA.
Yeah, I mean,
That was
that's-
good, some of the things you read there.
How much of this was from that, do you remember? Yeah,
You know,
my,
rather than approval, disapproval, just kind of put some of that in there. Some of that was good.
So maybe we'll replace that second sentence.
Yeah,
with
maybe,
something.
yeah, we can look at that.
We can-
I think a lot of it was, we can look at it again, but I think,
And I think classifications, I mean, most people went to, you know, high school and biology or classifications of mammals and all those guys, like that word, I understand what that means, and I'm not a librarian. You know, and maybe instead of, because labeling, I do think of someone has gone through and what it take, if that's what you're like labeled my spice rack to like organize it, right? Whereas classifications would
I
just be
mean,
like.
could we just say something about call numbers? Because that, people would know what that is, right? That's.
Classifications is fine. You don't have to
Yeah.
apologize for being a librarian.
Try to avoid a lot of library speak, and that's just
No,
such a
this is a
cataloging.
Classification is more common than call number for me.
But, all right.
I mean, I know what you're talking about, but I wouldn't have come up with that verbiage. I would have thought, well, it's, I guess, I just have a question. I mean, I've heard some conversations in the community related to this, and I think, so I would be curious how to support the intent with being able to use the correct wording, because I think the teen or the why, like, I'm talking about the binding. So is that, you know, where it is, could be call number, whether it's in the teen or in the kids world, that whatever that refers to, because now I'm getting confused. I was on board and then I just went off, because the classification labeling, so whatever that reflects, what would that be? Like, you know, where it was like, you know, the why for the, you know.
Right.
Yeah, so what is that?
Well, that's something that we assign, it's the call number that's on the spine
Is
to
that
say,
classification?
Location.
it's the
So
location.
it's
of it,
not
basically.
classification.
Well, yeah, we install classification.
Yeah, I mean, there's, you know, when you're in library school, you take
Yeah.
a class called cataloging and classification.
Classification, yeah.
Which is, I'm cataloging this book, which means I'm describing it, and I'm classifying it, meaning I'm going to say where it's going to go, and that's the classification.
I think my
And
point,
assign it a duty number.
and the reason, and you clearly know what you're talking about, because I don't know that. But I think where I've heard people that have this concern, or where there has been just a question, is my child checking out certain material in different areas. So again, that somehow that might be what you deal with and what they're having, what they have access to. So I think the best way in whatever library terms that, whether that's classification, labeling, location, however that is to make clear that that's not an approval or indicate age appropriateness. So however.
It was a cataloging and classification.
Okay, how about this? What if we simplified it, only use that first sentence, but change it up a little bit to say, library items are classified and labeled broadly only for the purpose of locating them within the collection. Stating this is the sole purpose of labeling, it's only for location. Everything else is,
Yeah, I put that to the committee, that sounds good.
okay, all right, we'll go back and talk about it.
Did you write that down?
Yeah.
You gotta record it
Oh,
too.
yeah.
Yeah.
we're recording.
And going on to another paragraph. I'm bothered a bit, recognition of public interest. First of all, a resident may request an addition. I like the word suggest. Request mean they're requesting it, we're gonna get it no matter what. I think suggest is better because it's the librarian's decision of whether they're going to add that to the collection or not. And I don't think I would use the word withdrawal. I reworded the sentence and I can give it to you here. That first sentence I have, a resident may suggest an addition of an item for the collection or request the reconsideration of an item that is currently in the library's collection by following established procedures. So it's not, it's separating them and not combining it. And I just wouldn't put withdrawal in there because the first thing is reconsideration. So that's my thought. So I'd be glad to hear you can have that sheet.
Okay, as long as we're still on that page, then can we talk about the residents who wish to discuss the contents of the library's collection are encouraged to discuss their concerns with the collection services manager. So this was part of the discussion last time, librarian versus manager. So in process and how we manage this currently, requests might come in or conversations might start with info staff or other staff out on the floor. They would then go to Cindy, right?
Or the selector.
Or the
What-
selector, right. And then if it is escalated, then it would be escalated to the manager. Now, the way this is worded, I think covers that. It says that they're encouraged to discuss their concerns with the collection services manager. So if their concerns are not addressed in those first couple conversations, it does go to the manager. Is this, now this is a little bit of, I realize we're completing process and policy here a little bit, but does that match what everybody understands? Does our process match what the policy states, and is the intent of the policy reflecting what our process is? I just want to make sure we're all clear on it for it.
So the first stage is that it goes to the collection services librarian.
Correct.
Correct. Okay. Does it say that actually in here?
All it states is that any resident who wants to discuss the contents should discuss their concerns with the collection services manager, and they typically will if it gets to that point, if someone else.
Absolutely would.
So is there another procedure or policy that directs that? So there isn't any question.
Then we have an internal policy of, where a request or suggestion might start. And then it goes through the number, like it goes through the librarian, then the manager, then it comes up to Dana and the deputy director, then myself, and then eventually to the board if they're that. There's also at some point in there, and I believe the manager would give them this information, the form to fill out to actually start the formal process.
So, okay, the only reason I'm asking this line of questions, I just want to make sure that somebody doesn't come back at some point and say, hey, well, wait a second. This just says the collection service manager, as long as we have something written. That's the procedure that says this is how it goes. This is how it goes. I mean, I've got no problem with that wording.
Well, and I'm just thinking, little minor thing, I capitalize that collection services manager. But as long as it is clear to staff, if there are complaints, a page on the floor could be getting a complaint. And that's why I think by having one position named, then, well, you could have, I don't know how many people you have selecting materials, but the collection manager might then, the next step would to go to that librarian and say, we've had this complaint. But I think it should be one person that is fielding this for simplicity and not confusion of, well, which librarian got this book, So I think that I like this, like the way
it's
it's stated,
written.
the way it's written, yes.
So it
I like
eventually goes to the manager. It may, so if
Well, I'm just thinking, if someone has a complaint and says, I want to complain about this book, what does a staff member say? Oh,
Here's a
I'll
copy.
put you in, here's I don't know, in our library, we've got cards available, and here is the card of the collection services manager. And then that person can, that customer, if they so decide, could contact the manager. And then the managers delegates or whatever, you know, to the people, to the librarians.
Typically for us, well, do you want to speak to?
I'm just thinking of that question that comes to someone who doesn't deal with this, you know?
Yeah, that is.
And the answer, you want to make sure that they are well informed of how this should go.
So if I can address that first part about staff knowing, we have on our collection service information page a section on dealing with customer complaints about the collection. And that's been up for probably 2 to 3 years. That's been up there. Since 2022, we now do an annual review of the policy and the procedure. And I go to the department meetings for the service division managers and we review it. We review, okay, this is what you're gonna do. And basically we tell them, you'd be kind, you'd be empathetic. We say, we're sorry, this item wasn't what you experienced. Can I get you something else? And then if they want to fill out a comment card, they can do that. If they want to talk to somebody, they know to call Cindy. And then Cindy will decide what selector it was, or Cindy will go up by herself, or I'll go up, whoever is there. We're also doing training at staff day to review, you know, this is the procedure, we're gonna have training, so people can practice, what do I say? And we're not having them say how to defend the item. You're not defending the item, you are just saying, I'm sorry you had that experience, can I get you something else? And that's basically all we want them to do, we handle all of it. So I do feel like the service desk staff are well aware of what they should be doing. So I think having it, you know, that I'm not really concerned about them not knowing who to contact. If for this sentence worded as it is, if we're okay with the word collection service manager being an umbrella term, that it's me or it's Cindy or it's the other 2 selectors, so there's 3 full-time.
Okay.
So there's just the 4 of us all together, and I don't do any selection as the manager, I just have the 3 selectors do that. So if we're comfortable with that being the umbrella term, or we add collection services manager or collection librarian, so it's not me, it's them, or the designee, you know, that it could be whoever, I could say, I'm not here, or, you know, I'm in a meeting, somebody else could handle it.
You just want something as simplistic as possible, because the person most likely is not coming in and saying, oh, I had such a wonderful day, and, you know, I just, you know, that they're gonna have emotion to it, and you want the procedures as simple as possible. Yeah, so the training is very good, so that the staff knows and they don't, yeah. You know, and the problem is this doesn't happen every day. It could happen once in 3 years, you know, so it's important to have the continual training, so.
Can I,
staff don't get rusty.
I'm sorry to interrupt. One more question. The way this is worded is they want to discuss the contents of the library's collection. And my selectors get contacted in a variety of ways, on a variety of topics. So the way this is worded is, it could be a local author saying, will you order my book? Could be somebody who suggested a title that we decided to get through interlibrary loan. They want to know why we didn't buy it. Then this is not necessarily just about the reconsideration process,
Materials, yeah.
the way this is worded. And so we can have it written like this if we all understand it doesn't change the procedure, but the way this is worded, I don't want anyone to think all questions about concern about the collection come to me. So I didn't know if this was supposed to be more about the reconsideration process going to me.
It's under recognition of public interest, so there's a lot of different public interests in here. That what you're just saying to discuss the content, yeah, and I'm glad you pointed that out, because I was just thinking under that first paragraph, that kind of. Does that set the tone? I don't know.
I think it's kind of sandwiched in between, like
Mhm.
2 paragraphs.
You
that
know,
are
you're
talking
right,
About
yeah.
that, so it feels like, if you.
Maybe
read it
that
as
should
a
be at the
whole, It's.
Bottom.
I think it's okay where it is, because actually I think sandwiching in there does give it context.
Yeah.
I think we should broaden it though to say services manager or librarian, or collection services librarian, or something like that.
Collection service staff or something,
Yeah.
yeah.
Is that-
Not necessarily staff, because I've got other staff.
Okay.
And it really should be, it's
What about
my
departments?
collection librarian for me, it's not. the
Public services department.
Maybe you wanted a person, number.
Well, yeah, well, or at least.
I think manager or librarian will cover it.
Okay.
That seem okay?
not collection librarian,
or collection.
Yeah. because that's their position, that would be obvious to the staff.
Okay. Anything else?
That was fun.
Thank you.
Thank you very
All
much.
right, we'll bring a revised version.
Thank you.
Right.
Okay, so,
Yeah, item 4, revisions to human resource
Who's
policy.
next?
next up is Lisa Hack, our HR manager. Come on down.
One day I will be last on the agenda. Hopefully this will be a much quicker discussion.
Okay, so for item 5, or I'm sorry, item 4, we are bringing a number of HR policies that have very minor changes. These are changes to wording or just rearranging how they're organized. And so we wanted to bring them to the board to, get your input on it before we bring it to the actual board meeting. Lisa, do you want to speak to why you guys are going through these and some of the material changes within these?
Yeah, so when I started, I was new, had to figure things out, and the pandemic hit, and honestly, the constant reviewing of policies got pushed down and now the time has come to refocus on them. And so like you alluded to, we have a bunch that just need to be cleaned up. Language updated to what is current and accurate, few minor tweaks. So the bulk of what you're seeing is going to be coming through just as an FYI, hey, we want to make this little tweak. Are you cool with that? And then there are just a couple that we're calling out specifically to say, these have some bigger changes. So we really appreciate your input on them. Okay. All right, so item 4, there are 4 policies. I don't, do you want me to kind of go through and just kind of talk through my thoughts as to why I'm recommending these changes? Okay. So access to personnel files and recommending changing it to access to employment files. Employment is the term we use now. We reference that in our other policies, we use employment. So looking to be consistent across policies. Additionally, changing his, her language to they, them. And then, there are several policies that specifically said certain things needed to run through the human resources director. I'm a manager. Also, many of these things just need to go through the HR department. It doesn't matter which one of us do that. And myself or our generalist can do many of these things and should. So just kind of updating that language. All there is for that one. Any questions?
Let me ask a quick question, just in general thing. Now, typically when there are policies that the board has reviewed, like this one, 4.001, we have that. Are all these policies that the boards in the past have reviewed? Or are these policies that have just been that you developed?
No, these are,
Yes.
have all been
Yeah.
reviewed by the board.
Okay, so every single.
I don't know if all of them have, to be honest with you. There's some that I can not find. I mean, I'm sure if I dug through the archives of every board meeting ever, I could probably find out, but there's some that in our HR documentation, I don't know if they've crossed their path. And the documentation on, like, in terms of like board requirements and library rules are very vague as it pertains to staff policies and how much oversight and input the board should. Clearly, some of them, very much so, like tuition reimbursement, you guys decide budgetarily impacts, things like that.
So, and I'm trying to dot the i's and cross the t's and maybe not create any more work than is necessary too. Because if they are things that are that the board has reviewed as a policy, we usually do have a policy number associated to it. What I'm getting at is are there certain things here that as a board, we need to approve everything that goes on? Because we're kind of getting to the point where everything goes on a daily basis. And I don't think that's the purview of the board. Now, if we want to make these policies, the policy of, the access to the personnel files.
Well, these are employment policies, and they have been, we don't have numbers affiliated with the employment policies like we do the public policies. But if you want to say you don't want to see them all, that's okay.
I'm just trying to make it easier for you, and then also as the board is looking at, because, access to employment files, that's kind of that's kind of like a typical HR thing, how they're handled. And I don't know necessarily if the board, guys, or, well, trustee, just correct me if you think I'm way off here. We have to review every single thing that comes through.
Okay.
Because I think you guys are personally qualified to be able to figure that out and figure out what was gonna happen.
I think it'd be wonderful if we could just make, especially these smaller changes and the smaller policies and not bring them, have to bring them, because we do have about 20-25 policies that we are going through. So, it's just everybody's time, unless you want to see them, we'll have to bring them, but.
Yeah, I guess that's the question. We don't know exactly how much you do want to see versus what you don't. I know one of the board's main roles is budget and policy, right? And so I don't know how in depth.
I think if it's word change from personnel to employment, that's not a policy change. As you said, if it was, we didn't have access before, but now we're gonna give access, that's a policy change.
Okay.
So, if it's just words, cleaning up, we do this too, and clean it up and change a word here and
I
there.
don't know, I'm gonna miss Lisa.
I have plenty of things we do have to talk about.
Oh, okay.
I'm gonna call him in June and start, telling them all.
I'm gonna hear from the park district. I can tell you those meetings.
But, so then, Andy, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I hear what you're saying, like you're thinking operational, right? You're
Yeah.
thinking the operations of the library and through human resources, which I see that. So I was trying to kind of distinguish that in my head as well, because when the policies that we review also have to do with like, the library, governance of how the overall library runs, not like personnel. So I follow I don't know yet, I could think, but I see your.
I guess, yeah, I mean, I kind of. I'm listening to all of my fellow board members, and if it is a simple, he, she, they, them, things like that, I feel like that's a no-brainer, and we don't need to really look at that. But then I also look at our core values of taking care of the staff, and are there things there that we need to make sure that HR impacts how they enjoy their job, whether they get paid time off or whatever. But I think those would be changes of policy versus these just nuanced, sort of updating to be current with the times. So I don't know that we need to look at everything that is just needs those sort of tweaks, but
Like Ford out, if it already is something that that a board has approved, definitely
yeah.
gotta bring it here to the board. I look like this one employment and benefit category.
Literally one word. That's what we did.
What I'm confused on though is it says, at the end here, policy provides December 2020, approved by the Board of Library Trustees on December 16, 2020. Is there no like actual policy to this, or this is just?
So that personnel.
We don't assign the numbers like you're seeing that you're referring to 4.001. 4.001, privacy and confidentiality, that's a public policy that this is referring to. Because it's very similar and it goes into a little bit more depth as far as what the staff should and should not be doing. So none of our HR policies have numbers associated with them like that.
Sure.
Oh,
Okay. So my thought is, and if I'm hearing everybody right, you guys have, if it is a policy that we've already looked at and approved, fine, bring it here. If it's not something we've approved yet and you're just kind of wordsmithing some things, you guys have my confidence to make sure that you're making the right decisions on those type of things.
Thank you.
That makes sense?
I mean, do we want an FYI on it or?
Right, that's a good question. Do you want an FYI on it?
No.
either in for a pound, or in for a penny, and for a pound.
Yeah. The access to employment files, if you all of a sudden put something in there that said, we're opening it up to public. Everybody's policy up to the public, yeah, I think an
That would be
FYI.
having a different
Yeah,
conversation.
we'd be having a different conversation, but if you're changing from, like Carol said, from personnel to employment.
I just thought of something. I don't know what we say, I don't know, but it came to me. If you want to put anything about, employment files are foiable. Do you want to put that in there? So staff are aware, evaluations are not, and disciplinary action is not. I think, or no, maybe those are things that are acceptable. I can't remember. There's certain things that first of all, remember, it was the whole file was foiable, the whole file. And then, the schools had gotten it. Removed. And so now it's parts of it, and now I can't remember what, I'm confused, is it, I don't know, you'll have to check, I should know, but I don't.
We'll look at it.
Yeah, of what's, but I don't know if you wanna make that so that the staff knows that these used to be very private, and would that change 5 years ago? They're not private anymore, not everything's private.
Okay, so let's kind of go on here. Okay, so you've got something on that. But the next one, so that does involve a policy.
Sort of. What we did is we tied together the internal with the external practice in terms of making sure that staff recognize they are held to the guidelines in that public policy as well.
Okay.
So just calling that out.
Okay, so.
So just referencing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure, you'll make the right decision on that one.
Yeah.
Employment and benefit categories, I guess this was one that we did look at.
Yeah. And literally just one word that I think didn't get caught the first time in 2020, and so just correcting them. Yeah, exactly. No, you find it.
I have something to add to this.
Oh,
too.
benefit, yes, okay. Fine, yeah.
The part-time, under 20 hours. You might want to look at this, and they receive all legally mandated benefits, such as Social Security and workers' compensation benefits. And paid time off. That law goes in effect in January.
It does, but that will have to be a whole separate paid leave. That will be a separate policy in and of itself, the part of paid leave. And the Department of Labor has yet to rule on specifics
I know,
around that.
I know.
So, that's a TBD.
And I don't think temporary are included, and which you have said they're ineligible, but.
Again, this
I don't
is
think
talking
that's-
about how the individual is categorized.
Yeah,
That will be something totally separate in terms of paid time off.
yeah,
Separate policy.
This is just talking about you get legally mandated benefits, which at that point in time will become a legally mandated
Yeah.
benefit.
okay.
And employment reference checks, just rearranging words and updating.
You'll get that right.
Thank you.
Okay. Are we good on that one? Okay. Let's go on to item 5, revisions to human resource policy bereavement. I'm getting myself a message here. Where are you guys?
So in similar fashion, law changed and effective January 1st. Expanding, well, it used to be the Child Bereavement Leave Act, it's now the Family Bereavement Leave Act. And added a lot more to what can be qualifying and as bereavement time. Additionally, and so knowing that most of our staff reference our policy and don't go look up the Illinois statute, we really wanted to make sure that staff had it accessible to them, again, in the best interest of staff, knowing what benefits they have available, that they know, hey, a stillbirth, a miscarriage, failed adoption, things like that do count. And if you need extended time away from work, you may qualify for it. So let's have a conversation about it. Nothing in terms of our process is changing. We offer 4 days of paid bereavement leave, and that was approved by the board. And that dropped off there. I didn't print that, but I think it was in 2020 actually, or 2019. That we upped it to everybody gets 4 days, regardless of their employment status. So that's really what it is. It's just adding in the details about that new law to make sure our staff are familiar with it.
Question, Lisa, I know it mentions like covered family member a couple times. Is there a definition?
Yeah, so the law goes into some detail about what the covered family members are. We're always pretty generous here, and so it's kind of one of those things like, if we know this is someone who is a close familial relationship to you, and you need the time off, whether it be for what, whatever. We give people the time they need.
Okay.
We just want them to know that there's broader reasons they need.
Okay. Very good. Anybody else got any more questions or comments? All right, and let's move on to item 6, revisions to human resource policy, whistleblower compliance.
So really same philosophy, just in terms of the law changed in 2021. And we're just getting our policy cleaned up to match the new language of the law. I know it looks like a lot of crossouts, but it was mostly just rearranging the order of everything. So
Okay, that answers my question, because I was reading it, it seemed like the
Yeah.
cross-check stuff was basically saying the exact same thing.
Yeah, it was weaving new language and old language and rearranging into a flow that made a little bit more sense for current day.
Okay.
And the attorney has reviewed both whistleblower and bereavement. They have no issues with either of them. They had no recommended changes.
Good. Okay. All right, that's very good.
All right, so that I understand. We're trusting our judgment to bring you ones that we feel should discuss.
So which of these could we bring back? Just the two?
If there is a policy, okay, here's my thoughts, guys. If it's a policy that we're actually changing,
Like bereavement
4.001,
and the last.
yes. Do those? Are those ones that the board has approved before?
One is not.
I'm guessing the whistleblower one's the one that it is.
Okay, so we.
No. Oh, what?
We did whistleblower.
I thought we did
Did you just?
Yeah, you
count
said
them?
you
The bereavement one did for sure because there's a budgetary impact with the paid days off.
Okay.
So the one we changed at the board did approve that one. So that's
So bring those two back.
okay.
Is that okay? Is everybody all right with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Anybody have any other? I'm excited here. You know, the one thing I just wanted to ask a question, everybody's thought, and I was actually talking to one of our elected officials, just kind of curious about the bill that you were talking about with the book banning. The one thing I was just a little concerned about, it said, adopt the ALA, policy or whatever. Or have a policy that, I can't remember, I should probably read it word for word, but to not get rid of books or something like that. So it was something to that effect. And what I was a little worried about is I know what they're trying to do, and they're trying to do the right thing. But I was worried about unintended consequences of that. Where, as we were talking about before, somebody's just doing their daily job. And they decide that this book isn't one that anybody in the community is gonna read. So they make a decision that we're not gonna put in the library. Could somebody come back and say, hey, you know what, you're banning that book from coming to our library?
That was the concern of the library director, that we talked to this Julius associate, and no, it's, because I was good. I said, what if you bought a book on Muslim, it sat on the shelves for 7 years, and you think, nobody's checked it out, we'll weed it, is that against the law? And no, it's not. The main thing, again, the way they do these things, you could drive a truck through this law, it's, and basically she said, we just want librarians to make the decision. We don't want, one person or a group of people from the outside telling the library what to do. So now this law backs up the library and says, no, this is the law,
Right, oh no, it gives the library cover.
Yeah, it gives us
Which
cover,
the
yeah.
intended purpose of is great. I was just. When I first
Yeah,
read
no,
that-
we brought that up,
Okay.
and she's upset, oh, no. So, of course, there'll be administrative rules that will come out probably 5 years from now, because it always takes
Yeah.
forever. I don't even think, the Kids Act, have the administrative rules come out on that? I don't think it has yet, which we've adopted here. So, that will be a little more detailed, but that's what she was saying. So, we all believed her.
Very good. Anything else? All right, do a motion for adjournment?
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. That passes, and we are